Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. And I am your host and your sister, Nora Muhammad. And it is a privilege to be with you in another episode in another week. And I'm hoping to share some content and some information in this episode, as I do with every episode, that will help us become better to each other and better to ourselves. I'm grateful to have this podcast, and I'm grateful to have you as a listener. And it is with this podcast that I have the intention to edify my community, edify my people for the love of my people, because I do love my people. And I know that in the experience and in the history that we have, it has broken us down in so many different ways. And so I think that we need to be built back up. And the evidence of what we see in our communities, in our households, in our neighborhoods, in the national outcomes that we have, it is evident that there's definitely something that has been shifted in our pride. There's been shifting in the love that we have for one another. There's been shifting in how functional we are or how functional we aren't. And so it is with this podcast, with each and every episode, my goal to share something or to have a guest come on and share something that will enlighten and inspire us so that we can produce outcomes that are better able to serve the needs of our people. And so with this episode, in discussing leadership and discussing what it means to be a boss, I want to deal with some of the character defects that we have, the personality flaws that we have after being rearranged in such an odd way for a people, that we may not often have love of self, meaning our individual selves, and we may not have love of others, meaning our brothers and our sisters. And so helping us to restore that self-love and that self-pride is certainly a goal of mine. And so in discussing this episode and discussing bosses and leaders, it is important to know, number one, that every leader is not a boss, and every boss is not a leader. And so I want to talk about what distinguishes bosses from leaders, and why, if we are a boss, we certainly want to be a leader, but we don't want to just be a boss. And I found this really interesting quote, and I cannot attribute it to the author, but the quote says, "Remember, the difference between a boss and a leader. A boss says go. A leader says, let's go." Remember the difference between a boss and a leader. A boss says go. A leader says let's go. So I'm hoping that quote right there just sets the tone for this conversation. And, you know, I'm specifically thinking about those of us who find ourselves interested in positions of being a boss, but we may not want to be a leader. We may not want to be in leadership, and how detrimental that is for the people that we are going to be supervising, how detrimental it is for the people that we're going to be in authority over. So let's start with some definition. A boss is someone who has control, who exercises control or authority. A boss is someone that directs or supervises workers. A boss is described often as domineering and authoritative. Now, here's some characteristics and definition of leader. A leader is one with influence or power. He or she is a person that guides, who rules, who inspires others, and is a guiding head. And so just in the definition and in the characteristics that I shared of the two, certainly the description and depiction of a boss has more negative connotations than that of a leader. And remember, I said that a leader may not be a boss, and a boss may not be a leader. I'm sure that you've been in contact with someone, maybe even as their subordinate on the job, someone who relished being the boss, someone who may have been promoted. They may have been a colleague of yours, but they've been promoted, or you've come into the job and they were already in the position of a boss. And that person was rude. That person was domineering. That person was ego tripping and egotistical. That person was unsympathetic. He or she may not have been sensitive. They may have barked orders at those that they wanted to accomplish work. And frankly, a boss is someone that can be very difficult to have a relationship with. And I've known people who liked being the boss, but didn't want to be a leader. And it's obvious in that they stand from afar or from a distance. And it may not just be in proximity, but it could be in how they comport themselves. It could be in their temperament and how they set themselves aside from the rank and file workers or the rank and file members. There's a delineation, and that person is not easily accessible. And sometimes the leader is the boss is someone who may act as if they've never had any power or control in their career, in their lives. And it can show in the way that they're domineering. And because they are the boss, they don't always have to tell others that they're the boss, tell the people that they are supervising. They don't always have to remind someone, well, I'm the boss, They may stand to the side with their arms folded and their brow furrowed while they're watching or overseeing their employees' work, and they can create a very toxic work environment. And that's just, quite frankly, unproductive, depending on what your objective is as the boss. But that's very, very unproductive. A boss with that kind of disposition, quite frankly, makes employees uncomfortable, and employees may find other places to go. They may even create a conflict to be released so that they can collect unemployment while they search for another place to go. So bosses who lack leadership qualities are bad for business. And if someone owned a business, they should be very in tune to the kind of supervisor or leader the boss is that they leave in charge. If they have someone that's managing the shop in the absence of the owner, it's important that that person shares the values of the corporation, the mission of the agency, and shares the culture that the owner or that the managing partners want that entity to have, that they share that with the rank and file, because it is the rank and file employees that are completing the task to help the company, to help the business, to help the agency be successful. And if the rank and file members don't feel valued, don't feel successful, then you're going to have a difficult time getting out of them what it is that you want and need from them. And so let's talk about some distinctions between being a leader and being a boss. But before I do that, when I say that someone who is a leader may not be the boss and someone who is a boss may not be a leader, it is because, as I stated in the earlier definition, a leader is someone who has influence, right? So just because somebody has influence, that person may not be the boss, but that could be an employee, it could be a colleague, a peer that other rank and file members can go to, who they can get guidance and advice from that person, even more so than the person who's actually in charge of the business, which is the boss. And so by someone having leadership capacity and leadership qualities, that person may not have been selected to be the boss, and someone who has been selected to be the boss may not have leadership qualities themselves. And so I have been at places where the person who was the most influential was not the boss. The person who moved the people more so than anyone else was someone who demonstrated leadership qualities, but was not necessarily the person that was being paid to be in a supervisory or a managerial capacity. And so in discussing some distinctions between being a boss and being a leader, and I'm going to share some of these, and you may say, I've experienced this before. And if you are someone who is in charge of others in a leadership capacity, whether it's in an organization, whether it is at your church, whether it is as a parent, or if it is on a job, I hope that what I share with you and what you're hearing will resonate and maybe make you do some self-reflection, as I too am doing some self-reflection. And so let's think about this. A boss is someone who has a title, right? They may have been promoted into a title. They may have been hired into a title. So a boss has the title. And a leader may also have the title. But in the case of the leader, those subordinates that are up under that leader, they give the authority to that person in leadership and say, go ahead, guide me. Difference between a boss has the title, right? They have the position. It's a label. It's something that's on their door. It may be on their badge, but it might not be in their spirit. And the people that are serving under them may not find that inherent quality in them, right? So a boss is someone who is generally, and these are generalizations, but a boss is someone who can be described as results first, whereas a leader can be described as people first. A boss commands his or her subordinates. Leaders delegate, and they invite collaboration and feedback from those to whom they are delegating. Bosses hold other people accountable. Leaders hold themselves accountable. Bosses manage people. Leaders inspire and support people. A boss pushes, whereas a leader encourages. Bosses, they take credit, but leaders give credit. Leaders do not let their team work alone, right? So these are some generalizations, but they are also characteristic of the different kinds of personalities operating in the position of a leader. Sure, someone can be the boss, but they can also be a leader. But every boss is not a leader. And the owner of a business or the CEO of the company or the president, identifying people who are operating as bosses without leadership qualities, they should be very acutely aware of who they have in position, because a bad boss can depress an entire organization with their toxic attitudes, with their toxic behavior, with their toxic language, because they're on a power trip, because they don't help nurture a subordinate. They don't help nurture a member. They want to bark orders. They want to tell everybody what to do, but they don't model what needs to be done. Now, sure, somebody in a leadership capacity, sometimes there may not be time for an explanation, but they'll make time for an explanation later. So sometimes as a leader, you just have to give instructions and ask your people, let your team know that this needs to get done. But the leader will make time at some point to get feedback, to get insight from those who they are leading, so they know what's going on. Sometimes bosses don't know what's going on because nobody wants to talk to them, because they have bad attitudes, because they have a chip on their shoulder, because they're ego tripping. And so nobody wants to deal with them. But a leader is someone that others can come to for guidance, for advice, Even they feel comfortable bringing their own bright ideas. I have an idea. I think this would work. It may be better. We may be more efficient if we do it this way. This is what leaders want to hear from their team members. They want their team members to be inspired because leaders make other leaders. Sure, someone may come in on the ground level, but a leader looks and surveys her team or surveys his team to help identify the potential and nurture that in those who they are leading. A boss wants to give orders. A boss wants to write you up. A boss wants to sit or stand above you. A boss wants the authority, right? A boss wants their subordinates to serve them. But a leader knows that she or he has to serve those who they are leading. Leaders believe that they're responsible to the people that they're leading, and they're responsible to the organization. Leaders study effective leaders. Leaders study strong leaders. Leaders want to find out how they can be better for the team that they're guiding, right? So a good leader doesn't have a problem with vanity. A leader doesn't have a problem with getting feedback from their team members. Leaders know that their subordinates have an expectation of them, just like they have expectations of their subordinates, because it is a give and it is a take. So understanding that difference and recognizing that difference, you could be listening to this and saying, man, I've been a boss, but I haven't been leading. And these are some things that can really help me be successful, and it can help the other people that I'm around be successful. I got to tell you, I've worked at places and have found out that some coworkers were taking anti-anxiety medication because of work. Not because of something in their personal life, not because of something that's happening at home, but because of the stress and the toxic environment of work, that they are having a difficult time coping with the stress and the strain. And I'm not talking about jobs where there's a lot of physical labor, right? I'm talking about having the labor of dealing with a bad boss's attitude. And I've been shocked because that's too much. That's awful leadership, if we can call it leadership. That's a bad boss, right? So we don't want those who we are in leadership of or who we have authority over to be suffering under the weight of our mismanagement and of our ego. As a leader, as the person in charge, we must serve our team. We look to learn from our team, just like we want to learn with our team, and just like our team should be learning from us. So I would encourage you, in whatever position that you're in or a position that you aspire to be in, to consider what you've heard here. People who want to be the bosses, they're not really leaders. Sometimes they just want to have a master-servant relationship because, as I said, maybe they haven't in any other aspect of their life had any power, had any authority. And maybe they're tripping a little bit, Sometimes it's just a person with a domineering personality, but they don't want to be responsible for the growth, for the learning, and for the guiding. And I got to tell you, if you are leading, then you are responsible for the growth, for the learning, for the guiding. And man, that takes some work. It takes some work. You got to really roll up your sleeves and be dedicated to the people that you're responsible for. You don't want to just be in charge. You don't want to just be in control or be an authority to direct people and tell people what to do. You want to be accountable to these people. You want to be an example to these people. You want to show those that you're leading how they can be leaders by watching what you're modeling for them. Power without character, compassion, and accountability is a very, very dangerous thing. Being in charge, it is not for everyone. But if you are interested in being the head of a team, an organization, or a family, then you must understand the difference between a leader and being a boss. I hope this conversation has been beneficial to you. I'll be interested in your comments. You can email me at nora@noraspeaks.com. That's nora@noraspeaks.com. It's always a privilege to be with you in the time that we are together each and every week. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. And until next time, stay in peace. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, noramahammed.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@noraspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.